I've done that before. All right, Hack the Capitol. Thank you for joining us for our keynote with Representative Elissa Slotkin. I deliberately went and sought Alyssa's input here because, in the same vein of Will Hurd, Mike Gallagher, and Elissa, they have all served and they bring that unique perspective that only service can provide as a member of Congress to understanding the national security and the real implications to our society of critical infrastructure. So, without further ado, Elissa, thank you for joining us.
Of course, thanks for having me.
So why
Um,
did you agree to do this?
well, look, there is a small but growing number of members of Congress who really care about cybersecurity, and either from our past lives know how important it is, or by serving in Congress on national security committees, kind of catch the bug. And I think, as a former CIA officer and Pentagon official, certainly I spent a lot of time in my prior life thinking about cyber threats to the homeland, to our defense establishment, to our troops serving abroad. But now, as a member of Congress, spend a lot of time thinking about how cyber threats affect the average person, right? The K through 12 elementary school, our school system that's been hacked 3 times. Our farmers, just the average people who, frankly, don't know what their government is doing to protect them, and therefore feel like they're on their own on the front line. So that's where my interest comes from. Always happy to talk to people who are engaged in trying to make us safer and trying to get the word out. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. It's all too often that it takes a crisis for the education to happen. I mean, computers are the black voodoo magic, and cybersecurity, I don't know, that's my credit card getting stolen. And then something like Colonial Pipeline happens. And suddenly, in a hydrocarbon economy, we have everyone's attention because, wait a second, well, the gas prices went up, or I can't even get gas in my car. So, what progress have we made here in this country on critical infrastructure?
Well, look, I think, again, a lot of it is under the hood, but certainly going back to 9/11, I think we've done a lot of work in trying to think about how to protect our critical infrastructure. But it becomes visible when we have something fail. And Colonial, I think of as like our USS Cole incident in Yemen, right? It was like not too far before 9/11. We knew it was serious. We paid attention, but I still think we haven't had our 9/11 moment on cyber attacks in this country, and that it's only inevitable, frankly. And I think while the Colonial Pipeline was certainly the USS Cole, particularly for the East Coast where people couldn't get gas, for a place like Michigan, especially a place like rural Michigan, the attack on JBS and the meat processing facilities was also kind of a USS Cole, right? And I knew something was up and something was changing when I brought the Secretary of Agriculture to do a big event with farmers in my district, and we're sitting around in a barn. You got the like John Deere's behind us, and the first farmer stood up to give his comment, and it's like he's right out of central casting. He's got his hat on, his coveralls, and the first question is, "What are you doing on cybersecurity to protect us and to protect the agriculture sector?" So I think it's really raised in the American consciousness. I think what we have done that's been helpful is try to raise the profile of CISA as like the 911 call that you make when you get attacked. I think people didn't know where to call, and they're starting to get that. Communication, federal, state, and local, can always be better, but I think has come a long way. And you can go to the operations center for the state of Michigan and see our DHS friends there and see folks who are watching cyber threats. And then, frankly, in Congress, like money, right? Last year for CISA, the US Congress, especially my committee, Homeland Security, came in and said, "Thank you, White House, for your budget. We're going to add money onto CISA. We think CISA is so important, and getting cybersecurity is so important that we are going to, add money on top of your request." It doesn't happen with a lot of things, but it did, because I think this is it's really sunk in for a lot of members of Congress. So those things, I think, are going right, and that's the right trajectory.
You mentioned the proverbial cyber 9/11, and you used the reference also to the USS Cole attack that happened a number of years ago. So what still concerns you?
Well, I think that, I mean, it's like a cliche at this point, but you're only as strong as your weakest link, right? That just like someone forgets to do an upgrade or a patch or something, and suddenly they have a back door and can make, a big sector of our economy accessible. And so we're relying on people's due diligence to not only care about their own cybersecurity, but like do something about it on a regular and consistent basis. So that concerns me, that we don't have, you can't control. It's very, very different than conventional warfare, where, like the US military, the Department of Defense has a pretty good monopoly on the information related to other militaries, right? We have analysts like myself who like sit there and watch and really keep track of all these things. On cyber, I think it's just, you have American citizens on the front lines, and you don't have any one body that really dominates when it comes to knowing where these threats are coming from. So that concerns me a lot. And then, as I said, the ag sector just doesn't have the same coordination. And food security is a big deal. You may not think about it until you really, really need it. But I think we don't have what's called an ISAC, like a community around ag that's actually like coordinating and talking to folks. And then, I think this sense that that private companies that are well off can afford to hire someone to do their own cybersecurity, but the small mom and pop may not have the resources or the know-how to really protect themselves. But yet we still need those mom and pops. Like if you're in Michigan, and we do a ton of manufacturing for the auto sector, there are just a ton of mom and pops who have less than 50 employees who make an important widget that is required in order to make all our military vehicles and all our, commercial vehicles. So we need to care about the littlest guy on the totem pole, just like we care about the big sectors.
Actually, in attendance at the Hack the Capitol today is the brand new manufacturing ISAC, which I think is kind of the closest toward what you're looking at in agriculture.
Right.
And so in the final question, and this one I'm gonna try to set you free from it, right? Because normally when we're like, well, what would we like to change? You're shackled by the reality of, well, we only have so much money. We're only where we are today. But I mean, if you really could wave that if you could really wave that magic wand, what would you want to see fundamentally change in this sector?
So I think, I guess, again, if I'm stripped of all constraints, then I would love to see a situation where companies, particularly companies that want to do business, certainly with the government, that they have to be like certified for their cyber hygiene. And that literally there are certain requirements in order to be considered hygienic, cyber hygienic. And I think that it would give a lot of calm to a lot of people if they knew, okay, I'm dealing with a company that really takes cybersecurity seriously. But it would also peer pressure companies who maybe don't think about this enough to do more on this front. And then we have to get cybersecurity into the bloodstream in an even more intense way. I love Hack for Defense, and all these exercises that we do at universities to get it into the bloodstream and get young people thinking about this, A, as a career field, but B, just as a problem set as they go into industry. And then I think lastly, look, we all talk about preventing a cyber attack on the homeland. That's what we want, obviously. But I'm not so sure that we think about in the US government, what do we do the day after? So for instance, let's say a Russian group or a group emanating out of Russia attacks natural gas in Michigan in the middle of winter. We have no heat, and 26 elderly people freeze to death in their homes, right? Which is not an impossible situation to imagine. What is the proportional response? What do we do in the 2 hours, 10 hours, 24 hours after that's happened? In the United States, we have a doctrine of proportional response. Are we going to go and take out their heat and kill some of their elderly people? Is that the right response? Is it just a bunch of hortatory speeches that we make in front of a podium, what is the right response to these attacks? And I think while we have a community that looks at offensive cyber attacks in a military context and looks at defending against cyber attacks on the homeland, we don't have a ton of big brains thinking about the doctrine when they attack our civilians successfully and how we respond proportionately. And I would love to see way more war games that are not just Homeland Security over here and DoD over here doing their own silos of excellence, but actually combining together and doing these exercises together so that we can try and flesh out what the doctrine is going to be. And I think the next generation of defense professionals, of intel professionals are really, this is going to be squarely in their job jar because we don't have it yet. We do not.
Yeah, the challenge of proportionate response is that a lot of these regimes are typically authoritarian. It's a bit of a pyramid scheme where the folks at the top that are making the decisions are independent from the traditional private economies, which of course for them is in scope to target on us, right? I mean, what is the response to ransomware against the hospital? What is it when that ransomware is not just state sanctioned, but potentially state sponsored? And that's a lot of the policy questions we'll actually be tackling during the day at Hack the Capitol as well.
I think that's great because we've lost all deterrence, right? I mean, I mean, let's just be honest about it. We're not going to be able to deal with our problems unless we're honest. I mean, there's not one American who themselves or someone they know hasn't had their data targeted, right? In some way, ransomed or stolen or whatever. When I bring my superintendents of my K through 12 schools, when I see them in Washington, and I say, raise your hand if the data in your school has ever been ransomed. Every single superintendent puts up their hand. Okay, they're going after our kids' data. So I think we don't have deterrence. It's a cheap way to either raise money or to get at, the United States, your adversary. And we've therefore invited more and more sophisticated attacks. And I think we need to reset and come up with a scheme for how we're going to deal with these things because they're just way easier than launching a conventional attack. That's not going to happen as much. What is going to happen is suddenly we're going to go dark somewhere. We're going to have a deniable attack. We're not going to know how to deal with it. And it's just going to elicit more and more of that same kind of attack because we don't know how to respond.
After this call, I'll tell you what my prediction is on that one. I'm not going to do that one unrecorded. Elissa, anything else you would like to add?
No, I just appreciate what you all are trying to do. We need big brains and enthusiastic patriots working on these issues. And we need digital natives to really take the reins and help us think through that next generation. And I think, for the next generation of young leaders, this is really an area where you can really make a career, right? I was someone who was in New York on 9/11 and became what's called a 9/11 baby. Like there's just generations that focus on different things. And this generation, I think the sort of asymmetric warfare, tech in warfare is going to be just a growing area of both policy and politics.
Well, I think you encapsulated the value proposition for Hack the Capitol. Thank you.